So why do we need Black and Asian leaders in positions of leadership within the public sector? Well, I'd like to be quite audacious in terms of thinking about that proposition. And I would want to suggest to you that whilst we want to see people from diverse backgrounds in positions of leadership, that should also be accompanied with the opportunity for them to bring something different to the table, to bring a different lens, a different prism through which they view leadership. And so for me, it isn't enough to just say, let's have more Black, let's have more Asian leaders. And by the way, I use the term Black and African interchangeably, and I hope that that doesn't distract from your understanding of what it is that I'm trying to say. And the key really to what I am trying to say is that we bring who we are to how we lead. And who we are is at least as important as what we do. So the call for diverse leaders must be a call for diverse ways of leading. And if you think about it, you as an individual, all of us, we are a product of our experience, the way that we've been socialized, our upbringing. We are a product of our values and our belief systems that come from the way that we identify with the world. And that then gives birth to our motivation and our behaviors. And what we're seeking is to find some kind of synergy between who we are and where we are and what we do. So in places of work, we all know that it's a compromise in terms of being in a place of work. You have your ideology, the work has its culture, and there may be clashes. But in life, we do seek balance. And what is important is that where you spend your time working, the things that you do, the attitude that you display, the motivation that you have for doing the things that you do at work is in balance with your own personal values, your own personal belief systems, and the way that you identify with the world. So as an African Caribbean woman, I identify with the world through this prism. This is the way that I experience the world. And so I bring that to the way that I lead. And what we want from more Black and Asian leaders is that there is a space, a real space, not just for them to occupy a position of leadership, but that they can bring something new and different to the table, and most specifically, they can bring themselves to the table. If we think about the context in which leadership takes place, and we understand that leadership is contextual, then that brings some challenges. And it particularly brings challenges for Black and Asian people who are in the UK at the moment and aspiring to positions of leadership. And in the area of public service, one of the things that I think is really critical, and it is true to say that whilst we're talking about the UK context, these challenges are not unique to the UK context. In fact, they're global. So people working within Britain, or actually anywhere within public service, are working in highly politicized spaces. And those that would commentate on such things would actually describe the era that we're working in at the moment as a kind of post-truth era. An era where expertise and experience is frowned upon, where there is a climate, oftentimes, of what is called project fear. So you keep the populace in fear. Usually that is perpetrated through the media and through social media. For example, look at Britain at the moment and the discussions that are going on around Brexit, and also the scandal around Windrush. And those things are, they give an impression that Britain is at ease or not at ease with itself. It is ill at ease with itself. It's ill at ease with its past. And it's trying to break away into some new world where Britain can just survive in this kind of context of a sort of little Englander. And does that create a space for people from diverse backgrounds to actually be and to make a contribution? The other thing I think that is critical for us as African and Asian people to really consider is the extent to which leadership is truly in the interest of the greater good. So many of us came into leadership positions through whichever area in the public sector because we wanted to make a difference, because we wanted to be an advocate for those who didn't have a voice. And the context in which we are currently working is at odds with that. It is at odds with changing the status quo. There are lots of very powerful vested interests in maintaining the status quo, maintaining inequality and injustice, dividing people. I think if you look at the way that the world is going, there very much is a disconnect between those that lead, the policymakers, and those who are the recipients of the service in terms of their communities. So given that kind of context, and given the fact that in a post-truth era, there's a kind of amnesia in Britain about its history, its real history with Black and Asian people, the call for more leaders from those backgrounds actually present a wonderful opportunity for Britain to come to terms with that past, for there to be some amends made, and for Black and Asian people to bring something that is additional, not just for them and not just for their communities, but for the entire community. It's about creating a space where those people have not had spaces before. So for me, leadership is key, but it isn't enough to have people that look like me sitting at the table if all we bring is the same as what has gone on before. There must be something additional that we bring, and to an extent that is likely to be disruptive. It is likely to challenge some stereotypes. It's likely to challenge some ways of thinking and some ways of being. And it's definitely going to require of us that we create a new narrative, a different narrative, and particularly a different narrative about those who have been historically underserved by the system, those for whom the system was not set up. So it's creating that space. How can we do that? It's really important that we think about these things and we think critically about why it is we want to be a leader, what our purpose is in terms of leadership, what it is that we actually want to change, and how then we can find our authentic voices. And I shall talk about this later on in more depth, the way that we find our authentic voices as Black and Asian leaders. So whilst the context has challenges, I'm still optimistic. I'm optimistic that programs such as the Bali program are still running. I'm optimistic that people see it as a worthwhile piece of professional development. But I also want you to be quite courageous in terms of taking these opportunities to shape something different, to be creative, to think outside of the box. And another thing that I'm going to be talking about a little later on, alongside authenticity and additionality, is how we can be more present in our leadership positions. You know, many of us occupy positions of leadership, but we're not present. We're not really there. We spend a lot of time reflecting on what has been and what has been in the past. And those of you who know me know that I truly believe that the past is important, but not for it to be a prison for our thoughts and for our ways of being. The past is important for us to look back and pick the best from the past, and in many ways change wounds into wisdom, so that we take the very best from the past and we move forward in creating something better. But before we move forward, there's actually the present. And if there is one thing that I have learned in 35 years of working in education, is that we tend to spend too little time in the present. We are constantly looking back and we are constantly stressing about the future. And then the present is missed. What is required is a paradigm shift. And in order for us to enable that to happen, we have to begin to think differently about our purpose as leaders. And I think one of the criticisms of leaders, whether they be political leaders or leaders within public sector, leaders within any field at the moment, is the extent to which they are disconnected from those that they lead. So they have no real understanding of the lives that people lead and the realities of those lives. Partly because they are not in the present, they are not in the moment, and partly because there is this huge disconnect from not only other people, but actually from our own conscious selves. There's that disconnect from who we are as human beings, as individuals, that then leads us to be disconnected from others who are human beings around us. And in leadership positions, it presents itself in an even wider disconnect. And so what we need is a paradigm shift, and a paradigm shift that comes back to connecting us with what it is to be a human being, and therefore what it is to connect with others. And not only other people, but for us to connect with our environment, to connect with our planet, to connect with energy, and to connect with us beyond our intellect, connect with ourselves as spiritual human beings. So in thinking about a paradigm shift, what am I thinking about? Well, I think as an African woman that there are global paradigms on which I can draw, which can inform the way that I live my life and the way that I lead. But these paradigms are not the paradigms that I learned about in university. They are not the paradigms that are written about in canons of literature around leadership. They are paradigms that come from my people who have lived on the planet for millions of years. And so it is about us reconnecting with some of those global wisdoms. And I'm going to choose two to talk about in the next section. And one is Ubuntu, which is an African ideology, African philosophy of what it is to be human. And also I would like to look at Seva. Seva is a Sanskrit word which means selfless service, and it comes from the ancient Indian tradition of selfless service and what it is to be a selfless leader.